My daughter said, "We're better off without you." I smiled on the outside with shame and swallowed the pain. But she forgot who was paying for everything, and I made a decision that would make everything crumble quickly. My name's Dorothy. I'm 62 years old, and for you to understand better, I'm gonna tell you how it all started. You know that moment when a simple phrase changes everything? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. I was sitting in my ungrateful daughter's living room, having coffee like we'd done so many times before, when she dropped something that cut deeper than any scream ever could. There wasn't a fight. There wasn't any door slamming, none of that drama you see in movies. It was during a normal conversation, pretty calm actually, when she looked at me with this coldness and said the house felt lighter without me around. I froze. Not because she yelled, but precisely because she didn't. The calmness in her voice hurt way more than any explosion of anger would have. It was like taking a punch to the stomach while someone smiles at you. My gold digger son-in-law was sitting right there on the couch I'd helped pay for, and he just nodded in agreement. Didn't even bother to hide it. He was comfortable, you know? Like this was the most natural thing in the world. Like I was just some old piece of furniture taking up space. Right then, looking at the two of them, I realized this wasn't some passing disagreement, wasn't an argument we'd work through later. This was a decision already made, carefully planned out, and I was the last to know. They'd already talked about this before, probably several times, and now they were just informing me of the verdict. I didn't have a voice, didn't have a vote. I was just the elderly mother who was in the way. I forced a smile. I don't know where I found the strength for that, but I smiled, said I understood, that it was fine, that everyone needs their space. My voice came out steady, but inside I was falling apart. I grabbed my purse, kissed her on the cheek, she barely responded, and left that house like nothing had happened. The walk to my apartment was the longest of my life. Each step felt like I was carrying the world on my shoulders. When I finally closed the door behind me, the silence was deafening. I sat on the couch and just stayed there, frozen, staring at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. For the first time in my life, I understood I'd become a burden. Not a mother, not a help, not a cherished presence. A burden. That word echoed in my head non-stop. Me, who'd always done everything for her, who'd sacrificed so much, who'd been there in every difficult moment, was now just dead weight. The total humiliation didn't come with screams or direct insults, but disguised as honesty, like she was doing me a favor by being sincere. And you know what's worse? Part of me wanted to believe she was right, that I really was being inconvenient. It's incredible how we manage to blame ourselves, even when we're the victim. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every word, every expression on her face, every silence from my gold digger son-in-law. I tried to find a sign that I'd misunderstood, that maybe she didn't mean exactly that. But there was no fooling myself. Her tone was clear. The coldness was real. She genuinely believed they were better off without me. And the worst part was that, for years, I'd made myself so available, so present, that I never noticed I was becoming disposable. When you do too much for someone, eventually they stop valuing it and start expecting it. And when you become an expectation, you're no longer a gift, you're an obligation. I woke up the next morning feeling an emptiness I'd never felt before. It wasn't ordinary sadness. It was something deeper, heavier. It was the feeling that everything I'd built, all the love I'd given, meant nothing. I looked in the mirror and saw a tired woman, an elderly mother who'd given her entire life for her daughter and now heard she was in the way. Had I really become a burden? Did my presence really bother them that much? These questions tortured me because part of me still wanted to find a justification for the pain I was feeling, but there wasn't any. The truth was simple and cruel. I wasn't welcome in my own daughter's life anymore. What hurt most was remembering everything I'd done. I'm not talking about grand things, but those small daily gestures that nobody sees, nobody counts, nobody recognizes. How many times did I drop my commitments to pick up the grandkids from school? How many bills did I pay when their money didn't stretch to the end of the month? How many times did I pretend not to notice the ingratitude because I didn't want to create conflict? I was their invisible safety net, always there to hold everything together when things threatened to fall apart. But holding others up for so long made me forget to take care of myself. And now, when I needed support the most, I discovered I was completely alone. In the days that followed, I tried to keep my routine. I did my shopping, cleaned the house, watched TV, but everything felt empty. Every activity reminded me of her, of the grandkids, of how I used to have a clear purpose. My phone sat there on the table, and I'd stare at it waiting for a message, a call, any sign that she'd realized how much those words had hurt me. But nothing. Her silence was even more painful than the original phrase. It was like she'd said what she needed to say and simply moved on, while I stayed stuck in that moment, reliving the total humiliation over and over. Did she even think about me? Did she feel any remorse? A friend called me during that week and asked how I was. I pretended everything was fine, because how do you explain to someone that your own daughter doesn't want you around? It's one of those things that, when you say it out loud, seems even more absurd and painful. She noticed something was wrong and insisted, but I changed the subject. I wasn't ready to admit the truth, not even to myself. After I hung up, I realized I was completely isolated. I'd spent so much time taking care of my ungrateful daughter's life that I forgot to cultivate my own friendships, my own interests. She'd become my entire world, and now that world was kicking me out. It was in this moment of deep loneliness that something started to change inside me. The pain was still there, throbbing and persistent, but along with it came a spark of something different. Anger? Not exactly. It was more like a growing awareness that I'd allowed this to happen. I'd erased myself so much, given so much of myself, that I'd lost my own identity in the process. And the worst part? They didn't even notice. Or worse still, they noticed and didn't care. My daughter and that gold-digger son-in-law had built their comfortable life on my back, and now that they didn't need me so visibly, it was easier to discard me than to acknowledge everything I'd done. But something was about to change. I still didn't know exactly what, but I felt I couldn't continue like this. Couldn't just accept that role of disposable elderly mother, of a woman who gave everything and didn't deserve even a minimum of respect. Her phrase echoed in my head constantly, "We're better off without you." And each time I heard those words in my mind, the pain mixed with a determination I didn't know I had. They were about to discover exactly how much better they'd be without me. Because, without them knowing, I was much more than a presence in their lives. I was the foundation, the base, the invisible structure that kept everything functioning. And when that structure disappears, you ever stop to think about how many things we do without expecting recognition? Well, I did that every single day. While I was there, alone in my apartment, processing that cruel phrase, I started to remember everything I'd done for my ungrateful daughter over the years. It wasn't a small thing, no. It was an endless list of sacrifices that I didn't even consider sacrifices at the time, because after all, she was my daughter, right? We do it because we love, because we want to see our kids doing well. But as I was remembering each situation, each bill paid, each emergency solved, a bitter truth started to reveal itself. I wasn't just a present mother. I was the invisible foundation that supported that entire comfortable life they were living. I started doing a kind of mental inventory, the electric bills I paid when their money didn't stretch, the trips to the supermarket where I'd fill the cart and pretend it was just for me, but leave half the groceries at their place, the grandkids I picked up from school every single day because they both worked, or at least that's what they said. My gold-digger son-in-law always had that manner of someone who's too busy, too important, but I never saw concrete results from all that work. And my daughter? Well, she always found an excuse, always had something more urgent to do. And me, being a good mother, was always there to cover the gaps, to be the invisible safety net. What hurt most, remembering all of this, was realizing how much I'd normalized this dynamic. I'd convinced myself it was temporary, that it was just a difficult phase they were going through. My daughter always said this, "It's just until we get organized, Mom. It's just until next month. It's just until we get that promotion." But the temporary had become permanent a long time ago, and I was too blind to notice. Or maybe I didn't want to notice, because admitting the truth meant facing the fact that I was being used. And nobody wants to believe their own daughter is capable of doing that, right? We always look for excuses, always want to believe the best. I remember once when they had a car emergency. They needed $2,000 urgently, or the car would be towed and they'd be without transportation. I didn't hesitate. I went to the bank that same day and transferred the money. My daughter cried on the phone, thanked me 1,000 times, said she'd pay me back as soon as possible. That was 3 years ago. I never saw a cent back. And you know what's worse? A few weeks later, I saw pictures on social media of them at an expensive restaurant celebrating my son-in-law's birthday. Meanwhile, I was eating pasta with canned sauce to save money and replace what I'd taken from my savings. But I swallowed the anger, pretended I hadn't seen it, because creating conflict meant admitting I was being exploited. There was never a real thank you. I'm not talking about that automatic thanks people throw out without thinking. I'm talking about genuine recognition, someone looking you in the eyes and saying, "Mom, I know how much you do for us, and it doesn't go unnoticed." But that never happened. Every bit of help I gave was received as if it were my obligation, as if I owed them that. My gold-digger son-in-law was the worst. Cold, distant, always treating everything I did as something expected. Never a gesture of gratitude, never a kind word. He simply accepted everything as if I were an unpaid employee of their household. And my daughter? She allowed it. Worse, she reinforced that attitude. It was in this moment of painful reflection that I realized something that broke my heart completely. My presence was only tolerated while I was useful. As long as I was paying bills, taking care of the grandkids, solving problems, I was welcome. Not loved, not valued, tolerated. The moment I couldn't offer something anymore, or worse, the moment my presence demanded something from them in return, I became a nuisance. The total humiliation of those words, "We're better off without you," gained a new meaning. They weren't better off without me emotionally. They thought they were better off without having to fake gratitude, without having to include me in decisions, without having to treat me like a person. This real story was revealing itself more cruel with each thought. Their comfortable house, that home I used to visit, and that now rejected me, was literally built on my silent sacrifice. The down payment on the house? I helped. The living room furniture? Half of it I bought. The kids' room, all decorated and cozy? I was the one who paid, but none of it had my name on it. None of it was acknowledged. I was like those foundations of a building, essential for everything to stay standing, but invisible, buried, forgotten. And now that the building was constructed, why would they need the foundation? That was the cruel logic they applied. This truth started to hurt much more than the initial rejection, because the rejection was one moment, but the exploitation had been years. I started asking myself when exactly I'd become this version of myself, the woman who accepted anything, who settled for crumbs of affection, who called exploitation maternal love. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I had boundaries, had dignity, had a voice. But little by little, with each, "Just this once, Mom," and each, "We're going through a tough time," I gave in. I bent. I erased myself. And they realized they could keep asking, keep taking, because I never said no. I created a pattern of behavior where I was the eternal savior and they were the eternally needy. And patterns like that are hard to break because everyone gets used to their role. The worst part was knowing that, even after that horrible phrase, part of me still wanted to go back there and keep helping. It's pathetic to admit this, but it's true. A mother's love is a strange thing, you know. Even when they hurt you, even when they use you, you still want to be close, still want to be needed. But another part of me, a new part that was starting to grow, whispered something different. It whispered that I deserved more, that this wasn't love, that I had to stop sacrificing myself for people who clearly wouldn't sacrifice themselves for me. This internal battle was consuming me, splitting me in half. I spent entire days in this painful reflection, weighing each memory, each situation. And the more I thought about it, the more obvious the pattern of emotional and financial abuse became. What we had wasn't love, it was dependency. And dependency disguised as love is one of the cruelest forms of manipulation. They depended on me, yes, but they made me feel like I was lucky to be able to help, that I was privileged to be present in their lives. They completely inverted the dynamic. And I, naive as I was, believed it. But now, sitting there in my empty living room with that phrase echoing in my head, I was finally seeing the naked, raw truth. And this truth, as painful as it was about to free me from a prison I'd built myself. Because sometimes, the biggest humiliation doesn't come from others. It comes from realizing how long you accepted being treated that way. You know that moment when you simply decide that enough is enough? Well, that moment came for me on an ordinary Tuesday. I woke up, had my coffee, and while I was looking at that phone on the table, waiting for some message that never came, I made a decision. If they were better off without me, then it was time to really be without me. There wasn't going to be a conversation, wasn't going to be an explanation, wasn't going to be drama. I was simply going to disappear from their routine. After all, that's exactly what my ungrateful daughter asked for, wasn't it? She wanted a lighter house without my presence, so I was going to give her exactly what she wanted. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something beyond pain. I felt a hint of power. The first thing I did was cancel all my commitments with the grandkids. Normally, I picked the kids up from school every Tuesday and Thursday, took them to the park, gave them snacks, helped with homework. It was a sacred routine that I loved, I won't lie. Those kids were my joy. But I was also aware that I was being used as a free babysitter, driver, and everything else. So I called the school and removed my name from the list of people authorized to pick up the kids. Simple as that. Nobody asked me why, and I didn't offer an explanation. I just let them know that starting that week, I wouldn't be picking them up anymore. Hanging up that phone was both liberating and terrifying. It was like cutting a cord that tied me to them. Then, I went to the supermarket for the last time with them in mind. But this time, I only bought for myself. My cart was strangely empty. After all, I always filled that thing thinking about everything they needed. Now, looking only at my items, I realized how much I spent on them. It was scary. I got my simple little things, paid, and left there with a strange feeling, freedom mixed with guilt. Because even knowing I was doing the right thing, part of me still felt like a horrible mother for abandoning my daughter. But I had to remember, she was the one who abandoned me first. She was the one who said she didn't want me around. I was just respecting her wishes. The bills were the hardest part. I had access to their electric and internet bills because, well, I was the one who paid most months. I removed my credit card from all the automatic payments, canceled the monthly transfers I made to help, simply cut off the financial flow like someone turning off a faucet. It was liberating in a painful way, you know? Because each click, each cancellation was like officially admitting that my daughter had used me. It wasn't speculation or paranoia anymore. It was concrete fact. I was literally seeing how much money left my account every month for their pockets. And it was a lot. Way more than I'd been aware of until I sat there and added it all up. I didn't warn them. That was the main point of my plan, or my lack of plan. I simply disappeared, didn't send a message explaining, didn't call to give them satisfaction, didn't create a scene, just vanished from their lives like a ghost. And you know why? Because explanations give room for manipulation. If I called my daughter and said, "Look, I was hurt by what you said, and I'm going to distance myself a bit," she'd minimize it. She'd say I misunderstood. She'd make me feel guilty for being too sensitive. So I didn't give her that chance. I just evaporated. It was the first time in my life I acted without justifying myself, without asking permission, without worrying about other people's reactions. And that was terrifying. The first few days were the worst. My phone rang a few times, calls from them that I let drop to voicemail, short messages. "Mom, is everything okay? I need to talk to you. The boys asked about you." Each notification was like a stab. I wanted to answer, wanted to run back, wanted to be the available mother I'd always been. But I forced myself to resist, left the phone aside, went for a walk, did anything to avoid giving in. Because I knew that if I gave in now, I'd go right back to the same place as before, being exploited, being used, being the convenient elderly mother who only served a purpose when they needed something. And this emotional story of self-discovery was only just beginning. My ungrateful daughter found my silence strange. I was sure of it, but I was also sure of something else. She believed I'd come back begging. I could almost hear her conversation with my gold-digger son-in-law. "Leave her. She'll get over it soon and come back." They were so certain I was emotionally dependent on them that they never imagined I could actually distance myself. They thought I needed them more than they needed me. And maybe emotionally that was true. I really missed them, really suffered from the distance. But I was determined to prove, mainly to myself, that I could live without being anyone's doormat. Not even my own daughters. The grandkids were the part that broke me the most. I found out from a neighbor that the kids were asking about me at school, that they thought it was strange when I didn't show up to pick them up. That destroyed me inside. Because they were innocent in all of this, they weren't to blame for their parents' ingratitude. But I also knew I couldn't go back just for the grandkids, because that would mean returning to the toxic dynamic with my daughter. It was an impossible choice. Either I sacrificed myself one more time, or I protected my own sanity. And for the first time, I chose the second option. I explained to myself that, in the long run, this would be better even for the kids, because they needed a whole grandmother, not a broken and humiliated woman. Meanwhile, I was starting to notice changes in my routine. My house was quieter, that's true, but it was also more mine. I didn't have that constant feeling anymore of waiting for the next request for help, the next favor that was actually a disguised obligation. I started doing things I'd abandoned years ago, reading an entire book without interruption, watching a movie from start to finish, simply sitting on the porch without feeling guilty for not producing something for someone. It was strange, it was lonely, but it was also, in a twisted way, liberating. The silence without humiliation had a bitter taste, but it was better than presence with contempt. 2 weeks passed like this, 2 weeks of almost total silence. Their messages became less frequent, which honestly surprised me. I expected more insistence, more concern, but apparently they really were better off without me, like she'd said, or at least that's what they seemed to believe. I imagined their house continuing normally, everyone happy with the lightness of my absence. This image hurt me deeply, but it also strengthened me in a strange way, because if they really were fine without me, then I'd done the right thing by distancing myself, and if they weren't, well, that truth would show up sooner or later. And when it did, it wouldn't be me begging to come back. Reality has a funny way of knocking on your door, doesn't it? It took less than a month for that lighter life my ungrateful daughter wanted so badly to start crumbling. I was at home on a Thursday afternoon when my phone rang. It was her. I let it ring about 3 times before answering, preparing my heart for what was coming. Her voice was different. It didn't have that coldness anymore, that certainty. It had something I recognized immediately, desperation disguised as concern. "Mom, is everything okay? We've been worried. You disappeared." Interesting how now she was worried, right? When they needed me, I was important. When they thought they didn't need me, I was a nuisance. The math was that simple. I stayed silent for a few seconds, just listening to her try to fill the void with more excuses. But then she got straight to the point, because desperate people always get straight to the point. The bills were overdue. The electric bill came with late fees, the internet was going to be cut off, and they didn't have a way to pay everything at once. Her tone changed completely when she got to this part. It became softer, more childlike, like she was going back to being my little girl asking for help. But I wasn't that blind mother anymore. I was seeing the whole game now. And you know what shocked me most? The ease with which she went from total indifference to emotional manipulation. Not even an apology for what she'd said. Not even an acknowledgement of the cruelty. Just straight to asking for money. While she talked, I was doing the math mentally. Of course the bills were piling up. I was the one who paid half of them. Of course the money wasn't stretching. I was the one who covered the gaps. But they'd said they were better off without me, so logically they should be managing fine, right? This simple logic seemed to have completely escaped my daughter. She really thought she could discard me emotionally but keep the financial support. Like I was an ATM without feelings, always available for withdrawals, but not deserving to be treated with dignity. The audacity was impressive, to be honest. And the worst part is that, a few months ago, I would have fallen for it. Would have paid everything and even apologized for abandoning them. "How much do you need?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She rattled off an amount that made me swallow hard. It wasn't a small thing. It was almost half of what I received in a month. And she spoke in that casual way, like it was pocket change, like it was obvious I was going to transfer the money right away. I took a deep breath before responding. "And how are you guys going to manage in the coming months? Because this problem isn't going to disappear, is it?" The silence on the other end was revealing. She didn't have a plan, never had a plan. The plan was always me. I was their plan A, B, and C. And now that the plan had left the scene, they were completely lost. Part of me felt sorry. The other part felt a bitter satisfaction that embarrassed me to admit. "It's just this once, Mom. We just need to get organized." That phrase, that damn phrase I'd heard hundreds of times in recent years. It's just this once. But it was never just once. It was always one more and another and another. An infinite cycle where I gave and they took, without ever growing, without ever taking responsibility. And in that moment, hearing those words again, something clicked inside me. Their cruelty wasn't in the offensive words they'd said weeks ago. The real cruelty was in this dependency they cultivated while treating me as disposable. They used me and despised me at the same time. This real story was way more toxic than I'd initially realized. "I'll think about what I can do," I responded, and before she could insist, I ended the call. My hands were trembling. Not from fear, but from something I was starting to recognize. Anger. Pure, justified, healthy anger. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the complete disrespect. It was about telling me they were better off without me, and 3 weeks later calling me begging for financial rescue. It was about treating my help as an obligation and my presence as inconvenient. I'd been so many things to them: bank, babysitter, driver, handyman, but I'd never been the only thing that mattered. A person worthy of respect, an elderly mother who deserved love, not exploitation. In the days that followed, my phone didn't stop. Message after message, first trying to sound casual, then increasingly urgent. My gold digger son-in-law even sent a message, the first one I'd received from him in months. Short, direct, without even a hi or "how are you?" "We need to talk about the bills." Not "please," not "could you help us?" Just a statement, like I owed him an explanation, like I was his employee. This man's audacity always impressed me, but that message hit different, because it revealed exactly how he saw me, not as a mother-in-law, not as a person, but as a financial resource. And when the resource disappears, the respect disappears too. Or rather, the pretense of respect disappears, because real respect never existed in the first place. A friend visited me during this time and noticed my tension. I told her everything, about the cruel phrase, about my distancing, about the money requests that started pouring in. She was outraged on my behalf, which was comforting and painful at the same time. "You have to stay firm," she said. "If you give in now, it'll be worse. They'll learn that they can treat you badly and you'll still be there." I knew she was right, but knowing and feeling are different things, because this wasn't just any friend who was exploiting me. It was my daughter, my only daughter, the child I carried, that I raised, that I loved unconditionally. How do you deny help to someone you love so much, even knowing that person doesn't love you the same way? The pressure increased every day. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that they were starting to argue openly about money. Their marriage, which had always seemed so solid, was cracking. And guess who my gold digger son-in-law was blaming? That's right, my daughter. For depending too much on her mother, for not being able to manage on her own, for having built a life based on external help. The irony was so huge it made me want to laugh. He'd benefited equally from every cent of mine, from every hour I spent taking care of their kids, from every problem I solved. But now that the source had dried up, it was all her fault, and she, my ungrateful daughter, was starting to feel the weight of decisions they'd made together. The comfort that seemed so solid was cracking fast, very fast. I received another call at the end of that week. This time, her voice was broken. She'd been crying. It was obvious. And part of me, that mother part that never completely dies, wanted to give in immediately, wanted to grab my purse, go over there, fix everything. But the other part, the part that had been humiliated and discarded, kept me firm. "Mom, I really need you. We're going through a really difficult time." Difficult. The word echoed in my head. Did she have any idea how difficult it was for me to hear they were better off without me? Did she care when I spent weeks alone, processing that pain? Her empathy only showed up when she needed something. And this realization, though painful, was slowly freeing me. The power had shifted sides, and they were starting to notice. There are things you never imagine will happen, you know? Things that are so low, so cruel, that you simply can't predict them, especially when they come from someone you love. Well, my ungrateful daughter crossed a line I never thought she'd cross. After all the frustrated financial attempts, after realizing I wasn't just going to come running back to solve their problems, she decided to use the only weapon she knew would hit me right in the heart: my grandkids. It was on a Sunday afternoon when my phone rang, and it was little Michael on the line. "Grandma, why don't you come pick me up anymore?" His voice, so innocent, so confused, shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. This emotional story was taking a turn I would have never wished for. I was speechless for a moment. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that his mother hurt you so much that you needed to distance yourself? How do you place blame where it really belongs without destroying the image he has of his own mother? "Grandma's a little busy right now, sweetheart," I managed to say, my voice failing. "But I think about you every single day." I could hear my daughter in the background, probably monitoring every word. She'd orchestrated that perfectly, putting the child on the phone, knowing my heart would melt, knowing the guilt would consume me. And it worked, at least partially, because when I hung up that phone, I cried like I hadn't cried in weeks. But I also felt something new, anger at such blatant manipulation. It didn't take long for the next offensive. Pictures of the grandkids started showing up on my phone. Michael in his school uniform, all dressed up. Emma with a drawing she'd made for Grandma. Each image came with a supposedly innocent message. "The boys miss you so much. Emma asks about you every day. They don't understand why Grandma disappeared." The cruelty of this strategy was genius, I have to admit, because it wasn't my daughter directly asking for money. It was her using the love I felt for the grandkids as emotional leverage. Like she was saying, "You can deny me help, but can you deny your own grandkids?" It was emotional blackmail of the lowest kind. And the worst part? It was working. Each photo, each message, was a stab at my determination. One night, I received a video. It was Emma, with her little 5 years, saying, "Grandma, I love you. Come back to us." My daughter had rehearsed that with her. I'm sure of it. A 5-year-old doesn't grab her mother's phone and record a video like that spontaneously. It was fabricated, planned, executed with the sole purpose of breaking me. And it almost worked. I watched that video about 20 times, crying during each one. Emma's angelic face, those little eyes asking for something she didn't even fully understand. She didn't know she was being used as a pawn in a manipulation game. She only knew she missed her grandma. And me? I felt like the worst human being on the planet for causing that confusion in her little head. But then, in the middle of my guilt spiral, I remembered the conversation I had with that friend. I remembered something she said. "They're using the kids because they know it's your only weakness. But think about it this way. What example are you setting for your grandkids if you go back now? You're teaching them it's okay to treat people badly, because in the end, they always come back." That hit me like a punch, because she was right. If I gave in now, I wouldn't just be submitting to manipulation. I'd be teaching Michael and Emma that this behavior is acceptable, that you can use people, hurt people, and they'll still be there when you need them. What kind of lesson was that? What kind of grandmother would I be if I perpetuated this cycle? For the first time in my life, I made the most painful decision a grandmother can make. I sent a message to my daughter, not to her personal phone, but to her actual number, to make it clear it was an official communication. Don't use the kids to manipulate me. They're innocent in all of this and don't deserve to be used as bargaining chips. When you're ready to really talk about what you said to me and how you treated me, I'll be here. But I'm not going to respond to manipulation attempts involving the grandkids anymore. My hand trembled as I typed. Sending that message was like ripping a piece of myself out. But it was necessary. It was the line I needed to draw. The response came in less than 5 minutes, and it was explosive. "How dare you accuse me of using my own kids? I'm their mother. You're the one who abandoned us. You're the one who disappeared without giving any explanation. You're the one who doesn't care if they're suffering. Don't come give me a moral lesson now." Every word dripped with anger, and underneath it, panic. Because my daughter knew she'd lost control. She'd used all the cards she had. First tried to ignore me, then asked for money with weak excuses. Now tried emotional blackmail. And nothing had worked. For the first time, she was facing a version of me she didn't know. An elderly mother who'd learned to say no. And that terrified her. "Abandonment?" I typed back, my fingers flying over the keyboard. "You told me you were better off without me. I just respected your wishes." If that's abandonment, then what did you do to me exactly? I didn't send it. I wrote it, reread it about 10 times, but didn't send it, because I realized it would be adding fuel to the fire, would be playing her game, and I didn't want to play anymore. I just wanted peace, dignity, respect, things she clearly wasn't willing to give me. So I deleted everything and simply blocked the messages for a few hours. I needed silence. I needed space to breathe without feeling the weight of constant manipulation. This total humiliation had to end somehow. The following days were torturous. I didn't receive any more pictures of the grandkids, didn't receive any more videos, just silence, a heavy silence, loaded with meaning. My daughter was now applying the opposite technique. If emotional blackmail didn't work, maybe emotional deprivation would. It was like she was saying, "Fine, if you won't give in to the kids' requests, then you don't get access to the kids at all." It was cruel. It was manipulative. It was exactly what I'd expect from someone desperate. And yes, it hurt. It hurt to imagine that maybe I'd never see my grandkids grow up anymore, that they'd forget about me, that they'd grow up thinking grandma abandoned them. That was her bet, that this pain would be too unbearable. But you know what I learned in this whole real story? That loving someone doesn't mean submitting to anything, that being a mother or grandmother doesn't mean accepting abuse in the name of family. I loved my grandkids deeply, with every fiber of my being. But I was also starting to understand that I couldn't save them if I, myself, was drowning. Couldn't be a positive presence in their lives if I continued allowing their mother to treat me like a doormat. And more importantly, I was finally learning that deserving dignity didn't make me selfish. It made me human. The war was just heating up, and my daughter was about to discover that underestimating a wounded mother is the biggest mistake anyone can make. You know what happens when a lie starts to crumble? It doesn't fall all at once. It cracks little by little, piece by piece, until it can't be hidden anymore. And that's exactly what started happening with my ungrateful daughter. The perfect life she tried to project, that facade of a successful and independent family, was starting to collapse. And this time, it wasn't just inside the house, it was publicly. I found out from a neighbor that they'd lost the car. It simply stopped showing up in the garage. Overdue financing, I imagined. That beautiful SUV my gold digger son-in-law loved so much, that status symbol he showed off to everyone, was gone. And with it, a piece of the image they worked so hard to maintain. Their social media changed drastically. Before, it was picture after picture. Expensive restaurants, new clothes, weekend outings. That kind of life that makes others think, wow, they're doing so well. But suddenly, everything stopped. My daughter's Instagram, which was updated almost daily, went weeks without a single post. And when it came back, it was just old photos, memories of better times. Anyone minimally attentive would notice what that meant. The life of appearances had a high cost, and without my constant financial support, they simply couldn't maintain it. The house of cards was crumbling, and everyone around was starting to notice. This emotional story had taken a turn even I didn't expect. I started receiving strange calls, friends of hers, people I barely knew, reaching out to me with flimsy excuses. "Oh, it's been so long, how are you?" But with the real intention of finding out what was happening. Because apparently, my daughter was spreading a very particular version of the facts. According to her, I was the villain of the story. The controlling mother who'd cut off help on purpose, who'd abandoned the grandkids, who was being bitter and vindictive. She completely flipped the narrative, painting me as the cruel person in this whole situation. And you know what's funny? Some people believed it, at least in the beginning. Because it's easier to believe that an elderly mother is stubborn than to accept that a daughter can be ungrateful and manipulative. But truth has a funny way of showing up, doesn't it? One of her closest friends, a woman named Sarah who I'd known for years, called me. And it wasn't to probe or judge, it was to apologize. "I should have noticed sooner," she said. "I always thought it was strange how much you guys helped them. But now it all makes sense." She called asking to borrow money from me too, saying you'd cut her off for no reason. But when I pressed her to know what happened, her story didn't add up. Sarah told me things that made me realize how much my daughter had gotten herself into debt trying to maintain that facade life. Maxed out credit cards, overdue bills, loans with absurd interest rates. And all of this hidden from me, probably because they knew I'd question it. Their marriage entered a public crisis. It wasn't just arguments at home anymore. It was everywhere. An acquaintance told me she saw the two of them arguing in the supermarket parking lot, him yelling about money, her crying. Another person said my gold digger son-in-law had been seen at a bar, complaining about his wife to anyone who'd listen. She never learned to manage on her own, he supposedly said, always depended on her mother for everything. The hypocrisy made me sick. This same man had benefited from every cent of mine, had accepted my help with the grandkids without hesitation, had lived comfortably at my expense. But now that the source dried up, it was all her fault. He didn't take any responsibility, as always. Typical of him. My daughter started isolating herself. Friends who used to frequent her house constantly simply stopped showing up. Part of it was because she didn't have the means to receive anyone anymore. Without money, without those gourmet snacks she loved to serve, without that expensive wine that was always in the wine rack. But part of it was also because people were realizing the type of person she really was. When you're doing well, everyone wants to be around. But when things fall apart, you discover who your real friends are. And my ungrateful daughter was discovering she didn't have many, or rather, that her friendships were as superficial as the life she tried to project. The humiliation she caused me was coming back to her in a way I never wished for, but also couldn't help but notice. The most ironic thing of all was seeing how the narrative was changing. In the beginning, when she spread that I was the controlling one, some people took her side. But as the months passed and their situation visibly worsened, people started doing the math. Wait, if her mother's so terrible, why are they doing so badly now that she's out of the picture? The question started circulating, and with it, the truth. People who'd known me for years knew my character, knew I'd never abandon my daughter without a serious reason. And slowly, the image she tried to build of me started cracking too. Truth is hard to hide when the facts are screaming in your face. I received a call from a former co-worker of my daughter's. She was embarrassed, but felt she needed to tell me something. Apparently, my daughter had asked for an advance at work, something she'd never done before. And when the boss asked why, she dropped a story about family problems and lack of support. But the co-worker had heard different versions of this story over time, and none of them fit perfectly. "I just wanted you to know," she said, "that not everyone's believing her version. Some of us know you, and we know there's more to this whole thing." That warmed my heart in an unexpected way, because it meant my character, my integrity, spoke louder than any lie my daughter could invent. My son-in-law started openly blaming my daughter for everything. According to rumors that reached me, he was saying he married a woman who didn't know how to live in the real world, who always needed mommy to solve things. The irony was so huge, it would be comical if it weren't tragic. This man, who never worked properly, who always had that manner of someone doing a favor when doing the bare minimum, was blaming my daughter for the dependency they both cultivated together. But that's how people are, right? When the boat sinks, everyone looks for someone to blame. And it's always easier to blame your partner than to look in the mirror and take your own responsibility. Their marriage was imploding, and everyone around had a front row seat. The fall was being faster and more public than I ever imagined. And you know what's strange? I didn't feel satisfaction from it. It wasn't like I was dancing on the ashes of their life. It was more a deep sadness mixed with a sense of validation. Sadness because it was my daughter suffering as much as she'd hurt me. But validation because finally, other people were seeing what I'd always known, that their life was unsustainable, that it was built on my back, that without my constant support, they weren't as independent and successful as they liked to appear. The mask had fallen, and now the question was, would she learn anything from this, or just look for another person to exploit? There are moments in life when you know they're gonna happen before they even happen, you know? It was a gray Monday when I heard the doorbell ring. I wasn't expecting anyone, so my heart already did that weird jump. I looked through the peephole and there she was, my ungrateful daughter. But it wasn't the confident and cold version that had dismissed me months ago. It was a broken, tired version, with deep, dark circles and clothes that seemed to have been put on in a hurry. She hadn't even warned me she was coming, probably afraid I'd say no. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, wanted to simply ignore her. But the other part, that mother part that never completely dies, opened the door. And when our eyes met, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Real vulnerability. She came in slowly, like she was walking on sacred ground she'd desecrated. Didn't say anything at first, just stood there in my living room, looking around as if seeing everything for the first time. I offered water, coffee, automatic gestures of hospitality my mother taught me. She accepted the coffee with a nod, but her hands trembled so much that the cup clinked against the saucer. We sat facing each other, and the silence was so heavy it could be cut with a knife. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Wasn't going to start the conversation. Wasn't going to ask how she was. If she'd come all the way here, she was the one who had to speak first. This emotional story was reaching a crucial point, and I knew it. Mom, she started, and her voice failed. Cleared her throat, tried again. I came to apologize. The words came out, but they came out mixed with justifications that started right away. I didn't mean it that way. I was stressed, the marriage was difficult, the bills piling up, and I ended up taking it out on you. But I never wanted to really hurt you. I watched her speak, looking for real sincerity underneath the carefully chosen words. And you know what I saw? Regret? Yes, but regret for what exactly? For having hurt me, or for having lost my support? That was the question hanging in the air between us. Because an apology is only worth something when it comes from a place of real understanding of the mistake, not from desperation. I let her talk. Let her pour everything out. The financial difficulties, the fights with my gold-digger son-in-law, the stress of trying to keep everything functioning alone. And as she talked, one thing became increasingly clear. She was suffering consequences, but not necessarily learning the lesson. She described the problems as if they were things that had happened to her, not direct results of the choices they made. The car was taken away, she said. Not, we couldn't pay for the car. The bills got behind. Not, we spent more than we earned. Always in passive voice, always as a victim of circumstances, never as a responsible agent. And that worried me more than the apology itself. Do you understand why what you said hurt me so much? I asked when she paused. She blinked, surprised by the direct question. Yes, I know it was cruel. But I insisted, no, I want you to explain it to me. Tell me in your words why that was so painful for me. The silence that followed was revealing. She struggled to find the words, opened and closed her mouth a few times. Because you just wanted to help and I rejected you? That wasn't quite it, but it was close. Because you told me you were better off without me after years of using me as a financial and emotional crutch. Because you made me feel disposable. Because you only valued my help, never me as a person. I saw the words hit her, saw something moving behind her eyes. Understanding? I wanted to believe it was. She started crying. Not that manipulative crying I'd seen so many times, but something deeper, more real. I ruined everything, didn't I? The question came out in a broken whisper, and for the first time in months, I felt my heart soften a little. Because underneath the ungrateful daughter, the woman who'd used and discarded me, there was still my little girl. That child I raised, that I loved, who still existed somewhere underneath all the bad choices. You hurt a lot of things, I responded honestly. And it hurts more because it comes from you. Because I expected that of all the people in the world, you'd treat me with a minimum of dignity. But instead, you treated me worse than you'd treat a stranger. This raw truth hung between us. Undeniable. But then came the part I feared. After the tears, after the apologies, came the request. Mom, we're in a really difficult situation. The rent's overdue, and if we don't pay this week, we're going to be evicted. I know I have no right to ask anything after everything, but could you help us one more time? And there it was, the real reason for the visit. It wasn't just to apologize, it was to ask for money. And the worst part is, I already knew it would be like this. But it still hurt to hear. It hurt to realize that even in that moment of supposed vulnerability, she was still trying to use me. Was the regret real? Maybe. But would it be as strong if she didn't need financial help? That was the question consuming me. How much? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She mentioned an amount that made me swallow hard. It wasn't a small emergency. It was months of my salary. And she spoke with that desperate urgency. That tone of someone who's on the edge of a cliff. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to solve the problem, save the day, be the hero mother I'd always been. But the other part, the part that had grown during these months of distance, whispered something different. If you really learned something, if you really understand how much you hurt me, why is the first thing you do after apologizing ask for money? The question came out harsher than I expected, but it was fair. Because that was the central issue of everything. This real story was testing me in ways I never imagined. She went pale. It's not like that, Mom. I came here because I miss you, because I want to fix our relationship. The money is... It's just because the situation really is desperate. But her voice didn't have the conviction from before. She herself seemed to question her own words. And if I didn't have money to give you? I asked. If I were in a bad financial situation too, would you still have come here to apologize? I saw the conflict on her face, saw that she wanted to say yes, that the apology was genuine regardless of the money. But I also saw the doubt, the hesitation. And that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. The regret wasn't complete. The change wasn't real. It was just desperation disguised as redemption. I need to think about this, I said finally. About everything. About whether I want to have a relationship with you again. About whether I can trust I won't be used again. And about whether or not I'll help financially. She opened her mouth to protest, to insist, but something in my look made her stop. I love you, I continued. And it was true. But loving you doesn't mean submitting to being treated like a doormat. If you really want to fix this, you're gonna have to prove it. With actions, not with pretty words on a desperate afternoon. She nodded slowly, wiping away the tears. And when she left my house minutes later, I knew that hadn't solved anything. It had just made everything even more complicated. Because now I knew she was suffering, but I also knew she still hadn't learned. After that visit, I spent entire days thinking, replaying every word, every expression on her face, every tear. Were they genuine? Was I being too hard? These questions tormented me during sleepless nights. But whenever I was about to give in, to grab the phone and transfer that money, I remembered one thing. If I went back now, nothing would change. I'd just be teaching her that she can treat me badly, use me, discard me, and I'd still be there when she needed. So I made the hardest decision of my life as a mother. I decided to say no, not in a cruel way, not with anger, but with firmness. I sent a simple message. I love you, but I'm not going to help financially this time. You guys need to learn to manage on your own. This isn't punishment, it's consequence. And so began what would be the most painful phase of this whole emotional story. The silence after that message was deafening. No response, no phone call, nothing. It was like my ungrateful daughter had simply erased my existence from her life again. And you know what hurt most? Part of me expected her to react differently. To say, okay, Mom, I understand, I'll find another solution. But no, her silence screamed a clear message. If I wasn't going to be useful financially, then I wasn't good for anything else. That confirmed all my suspicions about her apology. It wasn't genuine. It was strategic. It was an attempt to manipulate me back into the role of savior. And when it didn't work, I went back to being disposable. This realization, though painful, strengthened me. Because it meant I'd made the right choice. Through social media and through mutual acquaintances, I started following the unfolding situation from afar, not because I wanted to see them suffering, far from it, but because, like it or not, it was my daughter. They were my grandkids. I needed to know if they were okay, even from a distance. And what I saw was exactly what I feared, their life completely falling apart. First came the news that they'd lost the house. A neighbor told me she saw the moving truck, the boxes being piled up, the air of defeat on their faces. My heart squeezed. Even knowing that was a consequence of their choices, even knowing it wasn't my responsibility to fix, it still hurt to see. Because an elderly mother never completely stops worrying, no matter how much she's been hurt. They moved to a much smaller apartment on the other side of town. A place that, according to what I was told, was cramped, dark, in a neighborhood that wasn't exactly safe. The kids had to change schools. All that comfortable standard of living they maintained, thanks mainly to my invisible support, had evaporated. And my gold-digger son-in-law? Well, he couldn't handle the pressure. I found out he'd asked for a divorce, simply decided it wasn't worth continuing in a marriage that no longer offered the benefits he expected. The mask fell off completely. He never loved my daughter. He loved the lifestyle she provided, a lifestyle I financed without realizing. When the money ran out, his love ran out too. Simple as that. Cruel as that. My daughter was left alone with 2 kids, in a desperate financial situation. Part of me, that maternal part that never goes away, wanted to run over there and fix everything. Wanted to pay for a better apartment, transfer money, take care of the grandkids while she worked. My fingers even dialed her number several times, but I always hung up before completing the call, because I knew that if I gave in now, I'd just be perpetuating the cycle. She needed to feel the full weight of the consequences. needed to understand that actions have results, that you can't treat people like trash and expect them to come running back when you need them. It wasn't revenge. I wasn't trying to hurt her. It was simply letting life teach the lesson I could never teach. This total humiliation she was going through wasn't my fault. The months went by, and the news reaching me was increasingly difficult to hear. My daughter was working 2 jobs to be able to pay the bills. The grandkids were having difficulty at the new school. She'd lost a lot of weight, seemed constantly exhausted. A mutual friend showed me a picture of her that had been posted, and I almost didn't recognize her. That confident woman, always well put together, had transformed into someone visibly overwhelmed and desperate. And me? I suffered watching all of that from afar. Because it doesn't matter how much someone hurts you. When it's your daughter, you feel her pain too. It's like we're connected by an invisible thread that transmits suffering from both sides. But I stayed firm. Because interfering now would be like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needed surgery. The hardest part was not knowing how the grandkids really were. I received fragmented information, that Michael was quieter at school, that Emma had had some crying fits. My heart broke thinking about them. Innocent children paying for the bad choices of the adults around them. They didn't ask to be born into that family, didn't ask to have a mother who used their grandmother without thinking about the consequences, didn't ask to have a father who abandoned ship when things got tough, but that was their reality now. And I had to trust that, in the long run, they'd be better off with a mother who learned to be responsible than with a grandmother who solved all the problems but perpetuated the dependency. At least that's what I told myself on the nights when I couldn't sleep thinking about them. There were moments when I almost gave in. Once, I found out Emma had gotten sick and needed expensive medicine. My first reaction was to grab my wallet and go to the pharmacy. But I stopped halfway, because if I did that, I'd be sending a clear message. You can treat me however you want, because in the end, I'll always be here to clean up the mess. And that wasn't the message I wanted to send. So, with a broken heart, I went back home and trusted that my daughter would find a solution. And she did. She asked for help at the local church, and the community mobilized to help. Finding this out brought me immense relief. Not because I didn't want to have been the one to help, but because it showed she was capable of seeking solutions without using me as a crutch. For the first time, she was learning to ask for help in a healthy way, not an exploitative one. My gold-digger son-in-law completely left the scene. He paid a miserable child support, when he paid, and rarely saw the kids. His selfishness became even more obvious after the separation. He'd gotten a better job in another city and simply restarted his life as if the old family didn't exist. He sent sporadic messages to the kids, promised visits that never happened, and always had a ready excuse. And you know who was left to deal with the kids' pain? My daughter. Alone. For the first time in her life, she was experiencing what it was like to carry the full weight of responsibility without a safety net. And although it broke my heart, I also knew it was necessary, because you only truly grow when you don't have a choice. I completed 6 months without helping them in any way. 6 months of pain, of questioning, of asking myself if I was doing the right thing, but also 6 months seeing, from afar, my ungrateful daughter starting to change. The changes were subtle at first, small comments that reached me through acquaintances. She'd stopped complaining about the situation and started focusing on solutions. She'd gotten a promotion at her main job because she was finally dedicating herself for real. She'd started attending a support group for single mothers. They were small changes, but significant ones. And for the first time, I saw signs that maybe, just maybe, this painful experience was teaching what years of enabling never taught. The villain was finally facing her own choices. And me, the mother who had the courage to let that happen, still suffered with each piece of news, but was also starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. 8 months. It took a full 8 months for her to come back, and when she came back, it was different from all the other times. There wasn't a surprise doorbell, wasn't a desperate call. It was a simple message sent on a Saturday morning. Mom, I'd like to talk with you, without asking for anything, without urgencies, just talk. If you'll accept, I can come over there, or we can meet at a neutral place. You choose. I read that message about 10 times, looking for signs of manipulation, of disguised desperation, of anything that indicated it was more of the same, but the tone was different. There was a humility there I'd never seen before. I didn't respond immediately. I let a few hours pass. I needed to think. And when I finally responded, I suggested coffee at a cafe halfway between our houses, neutral ground, without the emotional pressure of being at one house or the other. I arrived first, on purpose. I wanted to have control of the situation, wanted to be sitting and composed when she arrived. And when I saw her coming through the door, I almost didn't recognize my daughter. It wasn't just the shorter hair or the simpler clothes. It was something in her posture, in the way she walked. She seemed smaller somehow. Not smaller in a bad sense, but less arrogant, less full of herself. She saw me, and the smile she gave was shy, almost asking permission. She sat across from me, and we stayed a few seconds just looking at each other. I wasn't going to make it easy. Wasn't going to start with small talk about the weather or ask how she was. If she'd asked to talk, she was the one who had to speak. This emotional story was reaching a turning point. I felt it. "Thank you for coming," she started, and her voice was different too. Softer, more genuine. "I know you had no obligation whatsoever to agree to see me after everything." She paused, looking at her own hands. "I've spent the last few months thinking a lot. About everything that happened. About what I said to you. About how I treated you." She took a deep breath, like she was preparing herself to say something difficult. "I was cruel. I was ungrateful. And worse than that, I was blind. For years you were the foundation of everything in my life, and I treated that as if it were your obligation. As if you owed me that." The words came out slowly, each one heavy with meaning. And for the first time, I didn't see justifications mixed with the apologies. It was pure recognition. "When you distanced yourself," she continued, her eyes starting to get moist, "I was angry at first. I thought you were being dramatic, vindictive, that you were punishing me for a phrase I said without thinking. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, and I had to face everything alone, I understood." She wiped a tear that escaped. "I understood that you weren't being dramatic. You were being treated like trash by someone you loved, and you simply decided to respect yourself. And I'd never thought about how much you did until I had to do everything alone. The bills, the grandkids, the everyday problems. Everything that seemed so easy when you were there turned into mountains when you left." This admission, coming from her, was something I never thought I'd hear. And my heart, so guarded in recent months, started to soften a little. "I lost everything," she said, and it wasn't self-pity in her voice. It was acknowledgement. "I lost the house, lost the marriage, almost lost my job because of the stress. And in each loss, I saw your invisible hand. I realized everything you held up without me recognizing it. You weren't just help, Mom. You were the invisible foundation of everything. And when you left, everything collapsed because I never learned to build my own foundation. I always expected you to be the foundation." She was crying openly now, but wasn't trying to hide it. "And the worst part is that I treated you as if you were replaceable, as if your presence didn't matter. But it mattered. It matters. And I was too much of an idiot to realize it until it was too late." Each of her words resonated with a truth I'd waited so long to hear. I stayed silent for a moment, letting everything she said settle. Part of me wanted to hug her, say everything was okay, that we could start over. But the other part, the part that had grown in these months of pain, knew I needed to be careful. "I'm sorry for what you went through," I said finally. "Truly, because you're my daughter, and I'm never going to want to see you suffer. But," she raised her eyes to me, "I also need you to understand that that suffering was a consequence of your choices. It wasn't my punishment. It was life showing you that you can't build a house on someone else's back and expect it to stay standing when that person leaves." I saw her absorb my words, saw the pain but also the understanding on her face. "I know," she whispered. "I know. When you told me you were better off without me," I continued, feeling emotion tighten my throat, "you have no idea how that destroyed me. It wasn't just a phrase, it was confirmation of all my fears, that I didn't matter, that my value was only in what I could do for you, not in who I am, that I was disposable." My voice failed at the end, and it was her turn to extend her hand across the table, lightly touching mine. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. If I could go back and never have said that." "But you did," I interrupted gently, "and you can't erase it. But what we can do is decide how to move forward from here." She nodded, wiping her face. "That's why I came. Not to ask for help, not to go back to being like before, but to say that I recognize what I did, and that I want, if you'll allow me, to build something different, something where I treat you like you deserve. I sat there, looking at my daughter, no longer that ungrateful daughter full of arrogance, but a broken woman who'd learned some hard lessons, and I felt something changing inside me. Forgiveness isn't something that happens overnight. It's not a switch you flip and everything goes back to normal. It's a process, sometimes long and painful. I want to believe you, I said honestly. I want to believe you really understood, but I also need to protect my heart. Because it's already been broken once and I don't know if it can handle being broken again the same way. She nodded vigorously. I understand. I don't expect you to trust me immediately. I just hope you'll give me a chance to prove I've changed, with actions, not with words. That, more than anything else she'd said, gave me hope, because she was acknowledging that trust is rebuilt with time and consistency. And the grandkids? I asked, because it was a question that needed to be asked. How are they? Her face softened when I mentioned them. They miss you so much. They ask about you constantly, but she paused. I don't want to use them as bargaining chips again. I know I did that before and it was wrong. If you want to see them, it would be wonderful. But it has to be because you want to, not because I'm forcing you emotionally. This answer surprised me positively, because it showed she'd really reflected on her manipulation patterns and was trying to change. I'd love to see my grandkids, I responded, feeling my heart warm for the first time in months. But you're right, we need to do this the right way, not like before. She agreed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt there might be real hope. We finished that coffee with something we hadn't had in a long time, mutual understanding. It wasn't empty promises or instant reconciliation. It was recognition that things had been broken, that we'd both suffered, but that maybe, just maybe, we could start building something new, something based on mutual respect, not dependency. She didn't ask for money, didn't ask me to go back to solving their problems, just asked for a chance to show me she'd learned. And for the first time, I felt this was a chance I could eventually be willing to give, because this real story had been too painful to be wasted without learning. But I also knew words were easy. The real test would come in the coming months, in her actions, in the consistency of what she'd said, and I'd be watching, with my heart open but cautious, ready to give a chance, but no longer willing to be used. A year after that conversation at the cafe, my life was completely different. And you know what's most interesting? It was different in a way I never imagined. I didn't go back to being the mother who fixes everything, who pays all the bills, who's always available to clean up other people's messes. I built something new, a life that was truly mine. I woke up in the morning and didn't have that constant wait anymore of waiting for the next request for help, the next problem I needed to solve. For the first time in decades, I lived for myself. And although it took time to get used to it, to not feel guilty for having a life of my own, eventually I discovered something wonderful. I liked myself this way. I liked this woman who'd learned to set boundaries, who had dignity, who understood that loving doesn't mean erasing yourself. I started doing things I'd abandoned years ago. I joined a reading group at the local library, where we met every Tuesday night to discuss books. Seems simple, right? But for me, it was revolutionary. Because there I wasn't anyone's mother, wasn't anyone's savior. I was just me, a woman with opinions about literature, someone people listened to because what I said had value, not because I could offer something material. I made real friendships based on common interests and mutual respect. One of the women from the group, Margaret, became a close friend. She'd also been through difficult experiences with family, and our conversations were therapeutic in a way I didn't know I needed. For the first time, I had a support network that didn't exploit me. I also went back to volunteering. I'd worked at an animal shelter many years ago, but stopped when my ungrateful daughter started needing me more. I went back timidly at first, just a few hours a week, but that place became my refuge. Taking care of those animals, seeing them being adopted by families that would love them, had something deeply comforting about it. Maybe because, in a way, I identified with them. I'd been abandoned too, had been treated as if I had no value, but was finding my place again. The other volunteers were incredible people, full of compassion and purpose. And there, in that noisy shelter full of barking and meowing, I found a peace I hadn't felt in years. This emotional story had taken me to places I never expected. My relationship with my daughter changed completely. We didn't go back to being like before, and that was good. Because before was toxic, was unbalanced, was unsustainable. We built something new, based on respect and clear boundaries. We talked regularly, but not every day. She told me about her life, and I shared about mine, but there wasn't that suffocating dependency anymore. When she faced problems, and we all face problems, she sometimes asked me for advice, but didn't expect me to solve it for her. And you know what was most impressive? Seeing her grow. Seeing her facing challenges alone, finding creative solutions, becoming truly independent. She still made mistakes, of course, but she learned from them, and that was worth more than anything I could have done for her. The grandkids came back into my life, but in a healthy way. I saw them every 2 weeks, always on planned occasions where it was clear it was a grandma visit, not a free babysitting service. And you know what I discovered? That when you're not overwhelmed with responsibilities for the kids, you can enjoy them way more. Our get-togethers were genuinely fun. We went to the park, made cookies together. I read stories to them. Michael and Emma seemed happier too, more balanced. I think kids feel when the adults around them are in healthy versus toxic dynamics. And now, even with fewer financial resources than before, they had something more valuable. A mother who was truly present, who'd learned to be strong, and a grandmother who loved them without losing herself in the process. Financially, I adjusted my life too. Without constantly spending on my daughter's problems, I discovered I had more money than I thought. I started really saving, making plans for my future. I traveled for the first time in years, a bus trip to visit a childhood friend who lived in another state. It was just a week, nothing extravagant, but it was liberating. Seeing new places, doing things just because I wanted to, without feeling guilty for spending money on myself when I could be helping family. I realized how much I'd deprived myself of small pleasures because I always put everyone else first. Now, it wasn't selfishness to take care of myself, it was necessity. And this change in perspective was liberating in a way I can't fully explain. The house where I lived seemed different too. It wasn't just the place where I waited for the next crisis anymore. It was my real home. I decorated it my way, with things I liked, not thinking about whether they'd impress visitors or if they were practical, in case I needed to host someone in an emergency. I had plants everywhere. I discovered I liked gardening. My small porch became a garden where I spent Saturday mornings, drinking coffee and taking care of the flowers. It was simple, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, when I looked around, I felt pride. Pride for having built a space that reflected who I was, not who everyone expected me to be. This elderly mother had finally found her own identity. Of course, there were still difficult moments. Days when I asked myself if I'd made the right choices, if I'd been too hard, if I should have forgiven faster. Mother's guilt is a persistent thing, you know. It doesn't disappear completely just because you made healthy decisions. But I learned to deal with it. I learned to recognize when it was legitimate guilt versus manipulated guilt that had been planted in me by years of emotional exploitation. And on the nights when loneliness hit hard, because yes, sometimes it still did, I remembered something important. Loneliness without humiliation is better than company with disrespect. I'd rather be alone with my dignity intact than surrounded by people who used me. This lesson had cost dearly, but it was true. My daughter, to give her credit, really changed. It wasn't overnight, wasn't perfect, but it was real. She got that promotion I mentioned before, and then another one. Started building a stable life for her kids, met a new man, different from my gold-digger son-in-law in every way. This one was hardworking, present, respectful. She introduced me to him months after they started dating, nervous about my approval. And you know what impressed me most? When he learned about our story, he didn't judge me for having distanced myself. He said, "You did what you needed to do to respect yourself. That's admirable, not condemnable." Having someone new in her life who understood healthy boundaries gave me hope that she'd really learned what to look for in a partner. The cycle was being broken. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see a different woman. I see lines on my face that weren't there before. This journey left its marks, but I also see something new in my eyes. Strength. A strength that doesn't come from never having fallen, but from having gotten up when everyone expected you to stay down. I see a woman who learned that loving doesn't mean sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. That being a mother doesn't mean accepting any treatment. That dignity isn't selfishness, it's survival. And although the scars still hurt sometimes, Although there are difficult days, I'm happy. Genuinely, deeply happy, in a way I wasn't when I was being exploited. Because happiness built on self-respect is solid. It doesn't depend on anyone else. It's yours, and nobody can take it away. The humiliation I felt that day, when my daughter said they were better off without me, stayed in the past. I didn't forget. Some things you never completely forget. But I don't define my life by that moment anymore. I define it by the strength I found after it, by the courage to distance myself when it was easier to stay, by the persistence in maintaining boundaries when all my maternal instincts screamed to give in, and by the silent but real overcoming of building a life worth living, independent of anyone else. This real story taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love you can do for someone, including yourself, is to let them face the consequences of their actions, and that freedom and dignity go hand in hand. When you have one, the other naturally follows, and together they transform a life of humiliation into a life of purpose. Looking back today, I realized that that cruel phrase, "we're better off without you," was the best gift my daughter could have given me, even though that wasn't her intention, because it forced me to wake up, to see how much I'd lost myself, trying to be everything to everyone. It taught me that true love isn't measured in sacrifices that destroy you, but in mutual respect that builds you up. And most importantly, it showed me it's never too late to recover your dignity, to choose yourself, to understand that you also deserve to be treated with care and consideration. The pain was immense, the nights were long, but the freedom I found on the other side was worth every tear, because today I know who I am, independent of anyone else, and that nobody can take from me. And you? Have you been through something similar? Have you found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between your dignity and keeping the peace with someone you love? Have you felt like you were being used but were afraid to distance yourself? What would you do if you were in my place that day, hearing those words from your own daughter? Share here in the comments, because your story might help someone else who's going through something similar at this very moment. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss other emotional stories that bring life lessons and make us reflect on our own choices and relationships. Every story here is a mirror where we can see ourselves, learn, and grow. And remember, you're never alone in your struggles. Until the next story.